All right. Good afternoon. Okay, we're sure that the mic is working, right? Because it's important not only that you hear us, but also for the recording purposes for the MGIMO. I'm pleased that we continue our journey through the jungle of international insecurity, pretending that it's security, not that much. But yesterday it was a very productive day when both our speakers, including Dmitry Polikanov, and our speakers from Africa, from Zambia, from Somalia, Uganda, from Tanzania, and from Ethiopia, which is not the complete list of nations who is represented here, but there were those 4 brave ones who took the courage and PowerPoint to share with us your views on global security. Now we dig deeper and we look into some specific cases on some specific issues. And I'm very pleased that this afternoon we have here Senator Mikhail Vitalyevich Margelov, who was with the Federation Council, the upper chamber of the Russian Parliament, as the head of the Committee on Foreign Relations, if I'm not mistaken, Foreign and Defense.
No, not foreign and defense,
just foreign, for quite a number of years. 14 years altogether. Dr. Margelov also was a representative of the Russian president, Medvedev, Putin, Medvedev, and Putin again, on Africa, not limited to, but including involvement in the negotiations over the Sudan crisis and former conflict resolution there. But if you do your open intelligence exercise over the internet, for those of you who haven't done it yet, and put the Margelov name into the search, you will find many more interesting things than I'm telling you now, including family connection by our guest speaker today, which would lead to some portraits of Margelov Sr. In places like Bamako and others where decisions at the defense ministries and armed forces were taken. So Margelov is not an alien name for Africa. For some parts of Africa, it's even less alien, because when Dr. Margelov Misha Margelov was a young boy, he was helping his father, as he describes in his public interviews, in the operations in northwest Africa. If he would like to contribute more on that, that's fine. If Mr. Margelov would like to concentrate on the main topic, maybe in the Q&A it may appear some more personal details, but I'm no less pleased when I'm introducing policy persona. Also to mention that we have here an expert, an analyst on quite a number of issues, on American studies and on Africa studies, on international organization studies, UNESCO in particular, and currently Mr. Margelov teaches and chairs the department at the Institute of Asian and African Studies under the Moscow State University. And he's a true believer in sharing views with young generation, in bringing young generation on the scene, because older generation may be too biased, maybe too lazy, maybe too corrupt to change some patterns. A young generation may become older generation at some point, but when it doesn't happen yet, there is a chance. If I misinterpreted you completely, Mikhail, please correct me. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you for this colorful and sparkling introduction. Thank you for having me here. In 2008, 2010, I really was combining my duty as chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee of the Upper House of the Russian Parliament with the entirely new position which was invented as part of foreign policy guided by President Medvedev at that time, which was strongly connected with the Russian-American перезагрузка, reset of the relations between Medvedev and Obama. I was for 2 years special representative for Sudan, together with and in joint cooperation with General Scott Gration, who was the special envoy of President Obama to Sudan. We were working closely in P5+1 format, permanent members of Security Council, 5 countries permanent members, and European Union, on peaceful succession of South Sudan. The important international significance of the topic of the internal Sudanese partition of 2011 into 2 states and the emergence of South Sudan, a rare case, to my mind, a rare case for modern Africa of preventing, with the participation and assistance of the international community, an internal crisis and a state of civil war towards a genocide scenario. The precedent of the nationally, ethnically controlled separation of irreconcilable parties, the precedent of the formation of a new statehood as a kind of a guarantee against the most dangerous escalations of the ethnic conflict. This precedent requires its own study and political analysis. Regarding the cases and course of the Sudanese conflict, it can serve as a training tool for diplomats, international officials, and military peacekeepers, scholars, including the sections of the peculiarities of the African mentality in the culture of war and peace. In general, if we talk about the problem as such, the nature of conflicts in Africa, in which the terrorist element is actively wedged, is of a complex nature, if I may say so. These are not only poverty, but also artificial borders, which many African countries inherited from the colonial era, multi-ethnicity and multi-religion of the population, shortage of clean water and other resources, and the struggle for mineral deposits. Whether it is external inter-country or internal conflicts, the civilian population always bears the main victims. Often a conflict zone in Africa is also a famine zone. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are moving across borders, exaggerating shortages of medicines, food, and causing humanitarian disasters. Sorry to say, but I think that many of you here in this auditorium saw all what I am speaking in reality, what I'm speaking about in reality. Pacification, as a rule, through the efforts of the international community, usually does not establish lasting peace. We are talking about fragile constructions, if I may say so. The underlying causes of conflict are usually not eliminated. Up to 500 different ethnic groups live on the continent today, and ethnic borders do not correspond to political borders, even if they are internationally recognized. Remnants of tribal relations flourish in public life, tribalism which is being politicized today. And in tribalist societies, the image of the enemy is invariably present. There are twice as many representatives of the Islamic faith in Africa as there are Christians, 40% against 20%. A significant percentage of the population remains faithful to traditional religions. Interreligious conflicts are being intensified by Islamic extremists, while Christian communities in Africa are also being radicalized in some places. And according to the various estimates in the post-colonial period, several dozen bloody conflicts of various strengths were recorded here, in which from 5 to 10 million people died. It is estimated that in the 70s and in the 90s of the last century, 78 coups d'etat took place in Africa, with the physical destruction of 25 presidents. In some countries, conflict is fueled by the economic and criminal struggle for the export of resources, in others by rivalry for power and resources, and thirdly, conflicts are caused by the complete collapse of statehood. Another characteristic feature of the problem of conflicts and crises in Africa is the active role of the international community, primarily represented by the United Nations, regional organizations, including African ones, and neighboring countries to contribute to their solutions. The role of such an external factor is very noticeable. However, the forms vary greatly. The international community, first of all, the UN, together with the African Union, resolve conflicts through negotiations and mediation. The so-called Second Circuit diplomacy is becoming widespread, which operates today along with official diplomacy of foreign ministries, if I may say so. The diplomacy of the Second Circuit carries out informal mediation between the warring factions of conflicts without any pressure. Informal meetings of opponents are organized and public opinion is formed. As the special representative of the President of Russia, I had to act simultaneously within the framework of the first and second contours of diplomacy, organize, for example, a conference on Sudan problems in Moscow, work with the framework of International Organization of Asian and African Solidarity, and etc. It is especially important that in Africa the government is extremely personalized, and personal contacts with representatives of the official leadership and the opposition are of particular importance. All special representatives and other participants in the settlement are trying to establish these contacts. Information in Africa is well received from those who know them personally. But in Africa, it is often necessary, to my mind, to resort to military peacemaking and peace enforcement. It is characteristic that the countries whose military contingents take part in peacekeeping are respected in Africa. This significantly promotes their image. Given these factors, Russia in particular is ready to take an active part in military peacekeeping and is taking part in military peacekeeping under the auspices of the United Nations and, if invited, under the auspices of the African Union. As for the Sudan itself, the international conflict here stemmed from the complex intersection of a complex socioeconomic and national ethnic causes. Its peculiarity is that it is fueled here by attempts to forcibly Arabize Africans. The ethnic and traditional differences between the northern and the southern parts of Sudan are striking. Indeed, 45.66 million people live in the north, which occupies most of the territory. At the same time, 96.7% of the population are Sunni Muslims, 3% are Christians, and 0.3% are adherents of traditional beliefs. But the population of South Sudan is about 13.3 million people. Over 200 ethnic groups live here. The main group consists of representatives of Nilotic tribes like Dinka, Nuer, Azande, Shilluk, Toposa, and others. And the main religion is Christianity. Catholic and Anglicans are about from 60 to 70%. Traditional beliefs are widespread, about 25-33%, and Sunnis are only 6%. Only 6% are Muslims in the south. The official Khartoum considered the rebels to be separatists. That is, the conflict could be reduced to a confrontation between the separatists of the south and the central government. But the United Nations highlighted socioeconomic problems, including environmental ones, for example, water shortages in the region, and in connection with this, the war of nomads with the settled population. There was and still is religious intolerance when pro-government Arab militants, the Janjaweed, that is translated as devils on horseback, drove out Gentiles from their native lands. There were signs of a classic civil war in Sudan over natural rents from oil production, when Khartoum wanted to squeeze Africans out of Sudan for oil development. What was the interest of the main international players in creating a new state? It's a good question, as some people say. The interests of the main international players in promoting the formation of a new state, South Sudan, were of course different. This is the sphere of foreign policy, and each country that influenced the situation in this part of Africa naturally measured how the emergence of a new state would affect the complex of its interests on the African continent and in global affairs. But judging by the international support for the idea of a new statehood, they agreed that it was more in line with these interests than maintaining the previous status quo. The main political diagnosis of the members of the international community coincided. The formation of an international statehood is more durable and confident panacea from the continuation of total internal slaughter in Sudan and from the final escalation of the internal conflict, ethnic conflict, into genocide. That was the peculiarity of the moment. In this region, the practical policy of the United States, key European countries, China and Turkey was built. This is why, despite the divergent interests of the main international players in Africa, they all agreed on the point of choice in favor of supporting the new statehood. Among the divergent national interests, the unifying factor was the dominant consideration in favor of preventing the constitution of the mutual extermination of the peoples who inhabited in Sudan at that time, and ending the practice of genocide in this territory. For it became clear that the political, diplomatic, and even military methods that could be used in Sudan were no longer able to stabilize the situation, which turned into a bloody drama that threatened to spread to neighboring states and acquire a regional scale. The Russian Federation has also joined the international consensus within the framework of the UN Security Council. And this gave Moscow the opportunity to significantly participate in international efforts to resolve the problem of Sudan and to promote the formation of a new state, South Sudan. I was appointed as a special representative of the President of Russia in December 2008, having made several official trips to Sudan to meet with the leadership of that country as well as with representatives of South Sudan. After July 2011, the leadership of a new state, the new state of South Sudan. In March 2011, these functions for Sudan were absorbed by my broader mandate, the special representative of the President of the Russian Federation for cooperation with African countries. It was in this capacity that I took part in the official ceremony of the Declaration of Independence of South Sudan on July the 9th, 2011, the day of the Declaration of Independence of South Sudan, the day of the end of almost 50 years of war. And a little earlier than this significant date, a tense situation was created in Abyei, the region in Sudan, which almost disrupted the celebrations. On May the 19th, the South Sudanese military fired at a mixed patrol of UN peacekeepers and North Sudanese troops. Oil deposits in this state account for 65% of Sudan's total proven reserves. I must say that oil is still straining relations between the north and the south of this already divided country. It is interesting to note that the flags of the new state, South Sudan, were made in China and delivered to Juba, the capital of South Sudan, by July the 9th. The day before in Khartoum, I was received by the President of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir. By this time, the issue of the settlement of the Libyan conflict had become one of the relevant topics. On this issue, the position of the Sudanese leadership coincided with the position of the Russian side. The parties agreed that in order to overcome the crisis, it is necessary to cease fire and return to negotiations under the auspices of the African Union. The parties called for a planned peaceful solution to the Darfur conflict and the compromise negotiations on South Kordofan. It was about the economic ties between Sudan and Russia after the separation of the South. The issue of Russia's participation in agricultural and energy projects in North Sudan was raised. I also participated in celebrations in Juba and met with the head of the new state, Salva Kiir. I gave him a personal message of President Medvedev recognizing the independence of the republic. In particular, the message said, quote, Russia expects that our partnership will be one of the important factors in strengthening stability and security on the African continent. The promotion and approval of the option of a new statehood on the territory of Sudan, its acceptance by the authorities of Khartoum, it was not an easy process. We must not forget about the long years of brutal internal slaughter and hundreds of thousands of dead, according to some sources up to 3 million people. But the final segment of the negotiations on the creation of a new statehood in 2005-2011 is a fact. Its reality was relatively calm. There seems to be one reason. It was during these years that the international community's interest in interstate separation in Sudan coincided with an internal consensus on the same issue. The leadership of Sudan and the leaders of South Sudan have come to a mutual understanding about the impossibility of peaceful coexistence within common borders. In fact, there was a combination of domestic and international factors in favor of the formation of a new statehood. This predetermined a relatively peaceful transition to it and the final stage of intra-Sudanese separation. Of course, the question arises whether this new statehood was simply imposed on Sudan from the outside, since Sudan was under international sanctions and was considered by some players a rogue state. The answer is no. Sudan can hardly be called a rogue state at that time, although yes, the state was under international sanctions caused precisely by President Bashir's policy of suppressing South Sudanese tribes. Nevertheless, Sudan was actively involved in the international negotiation process aimed at an intra-Sudanese settlement. Of course, it can be assumed that some Western countries sought to harm Sudan in the sense of weakening President Bashir's international and domestic political positions. However, this was not the basis of their support for the scenario of intra-Sudanese state separation. I repeat, the Sudanese leadership eventually realized the impossibility of controlling the situation in South Sudan and the deadlocked nature of using military force to maintain such control. The very political mechanics of the intra-Sudanese settlement, the separation and formatting of the new statehood was carried out with the active role of the United Nations and its Security Council. Framework formats have been established for conducting intra-Sudanese disengagement negotiations, as well as for coordinating and mobilizing international efforts to facilitate this process. For this purpose, in particular, the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, including the Russian Federation, authorized the de facto emergence of a new international mechanism, the meeting of national representatives on Sudan, of the permanent members of the Security Council, the latter in the format of continuous shuttle contacts between themselves, the world's leading capitals as well as the leadership of the same Sudan have developed a package of proposals on the scenario and conditions for the creation of a new statehood. The latter were approved at the level of the UN Security Council, thus creating an international consensus basis for the appearance of a new state on the world map, South Sudan. The political mechanism for the proclamation and international recognition of the new state was based primarily on the popular expression, the referendum of granting independence to South Sudan, which was held in January 2011. Based on the results of the referendum, the Sudanese authorities officially declared recognition of the independence of South Sudan. The very same independence proclamation ceremony took place a day later, on July the 9th, 2011, as I have already said. Of course, the question arises as to how effective this assistance of the international community can be considered to solve the international problems of Sudan through the creation of a new state entity. In general, it should be noted that the external factor is not an ambiguous panacea for solving intra-African conflict problems. It is significant, for example, that after achieving a lull in a number of countries associated with the intervention of an external factor, clashes and wars flared up in them again. These are the cases of Congo, Ivory Coast. Tensions remain in relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the explosive situation in Mali, in other countries. There is a danger of conflicts in Nigeria, where sectarian clashes take place from time to time. But there is a nuance of its own in relation to Sudan. It seems, however, that the main calculation of the international intermediaries has worked. The new statehood on the territory of Sudan, South Sudan, has indeed fulfilled its main mission, prevented the worst escalation of the situation. The danger of ethnic massacre and genocide has been removed. The peaceful formation of a new state after decades of military operations is an example of an effective and relatively painless resolution of inter-ethnic contradictions. It is clear, however, that it does not save from the manifestation of other international contradictions and military clashes, but these are more tolerable scenarios of crisis manifestations typical for Africa as a whole. So at the end of 2018, a deep socio-economic and political crisis broke out in Sudan. In December of the same year, large-scale anti-government protests swept the country. This has led to a weakening of state power and the activation of rebel groups in the regions. First of all, this has manifested itself in Western Darfur, which is an area of inter-ethnic violence. Instability is spreading to other regions, including South Kordofan, where attacks on army positions and studies of oil-bearing areas are recorded, and the Blue Nile. In turn, the Republic of South Sudan is at the initial stage of statehood formation. In order to assist in strengthening security and building development capacity in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution of 1996 of May the 8th, 2011, the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, was deployed. In December 2013, armed clashes broke out in the Republic of South Sudan between supporters of President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar. According to UN estimates, as a result of the ongoing military and political crisis in the South, since December 2013, about 3.4 million people were forced to leave their homes. The number of internally displaced persons approached 1.9 million people. More than 2 million fled to neighboring Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Almost 7.5 million South Sudanese need urgent humanitarian assistance and protection, and 1.7 million people are on the verge of starvation. Russian foreign policy in connection with the peaceful divorce of Sudan and South Sudan was aimed at maintaining the developing equally constructive relations with both Khartoum and Juba, with the prospect of developing economic and political ties with both countries. It can be stated that this long-term diplomatic work on the settlement of the Sudanese conflict has become an important contribution of our country to the stabilization of the situation in the region. As a result, there was a basis for the development of our dialogue with Sudan and South Sudan on a fundamentally new level. Despite the legacy of the civil war in Sudan and the continued tense relations between the two new states, our country has managed to establish effective cooperation with both Khartoum and Juba. Thus, the Sudanese leadership decided to grant licenses to Russia for geological exploration of solid minerals. Progressive trends have emerged in economic cooperation between Russia and Sudan, and the exchange of high-level delegations has become more frequent. The Sudanese leadership has allocated a significant number of licenses to the Russian companies to conduct subsurface exploration for gold, rare earth metals, and iron ore. South Sudan has invited Russia to participate in a number of oil and gas and infrastructure projects. As you know, the main branch of the economy of South Sudan is oil production. Proven oil reserves in this country amount to 7 billion barrels. Revenues from hydrocarbons provide almost 100% of the state budget, which ensures its potentially high solvency. The leadership of South Sudan has ambitious plans for infrastructure development. In particular, it provides for the participation of foreign investors in the construction of more than 6,000 kilometers of roads and several new cities. These projects may be of interest for the Russian side. The strengthening of Russian positions in Sudan and South Sudan is facilitated by the active mediation activities of our country aimed at resolving the political, ethnic, and religious tensions existing in these states. A wide range of relevant issues were discussed during meetings with the special representatives of the United States and Norway for the Sudan on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly and during visits of Pan-African forums. Russia takes an impartial position and develops relations with interested parties, which helps to increase confidence in our country. undoubtedly, cooperation with Khartoum and Juba can be considered as an important aspect of the Russian strategy for returning to Africa. In fact, the level of Moscow's political and economic dialogue with both countries, the successful combination of defending business interests and participating in crisis management, shows that Russia can and should create a foothold in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Margelov, for your very precise, detailed, and expert analysis of the matters, and using the Sudan-South Sudan divorce as some, I think, idea for conflict resolution issues, and also a message that conflict resolution is not impossible, because for some of us there are so few examples where diplomacy works, and so many examples where cannons win but not diplomacy, that in this building in Gimo, which normally should promote diplomacy, I think there is a growing skepticism on whether diplomacy matters at all. So if I may, from that example, which is a huge part on the Africa map, so I cannot call it a small example. Still, it is a specific example. I think there are certain there is certain food for thought for a bigger picture for Africa and, if I may, beyond. With that, may I invite all our participants, doesn't matter what country are you from, for Q&A and comments. And again, although we have now the plates for some of you, not for all of you, please anyway introduce yourself, at least where you come from. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much, Doctor, for your views, for sharing your experience in resolving the Sudan crisis, and also your perspectives, views of the Sudan crisis. And also I appreciate the role played by Russia in resolving the Sudan conflict. I'm Gashaw from Ethiopia. I'm also an expert in geopolitics, and recently also I wrote an article published in Carnegie Endowment for International Peace on Sudan
Undesirable
crisis.
organization in Russia.
I want to emphasize on two issues. One, in your presentations, you just told us the story how the South Sudan became a state. And separation or divorce from motherland, I think, did not bring conflict to an end. Take, for instance, the Ethiopian case, also the Sudan in South Sudan case. After South Sudan became a state in 2011, still South Sudan is in a crisis, in a conflict, particularly
Both Sudans are in crisis,
between the political elite, the rich Machar and also Salva Kiir. Now Sudan also reverted into another crisis after the coup d'etat. Actually, Sudan is a laboratory of coup.
Correct.
So my question is, what is the fundamental problems that is contributing or causing conflict to recur in Sudan? Because separation is not a solution, as we have seen from the experience of Ethiopia and Eritrea, also Sudan and South Sudan. Second, I'm so much excited if you share me the Russian perspective, interest, and position in the ongoing Sudan conflict, because there are a number of players, actors. Even the Sudan conflict is not a conflict between the Sudan Armed Force and the Special Rapid Force. there are a number of factors. Even some of the soldiers are recruited from Central African Republic, from Chad, and from other fragile state. And there are also external actors from United Arab Emirates who are supporting the Special Rapid Force, to Saudi Arabia supporting the Sudan Armored Force, United States of America, England, France, and others. So where is Russia? And there are also a number of peace initiatives. The IGAD Quartet, which is not successful. The Cairo initiative is not successful. The Juba, it is also part of the IGAD peace initiative. It is also successful. The Jeddah, initiated by United States of America and Saudi Arabia, is not also successful. Now the Switzerland Plus, the Switzerland Club, is also initiating a peace talk, which is also failed. This all shows the interest, the multiple interests at play. But where we found Russia, because there are a number of articles. Some argues that Russia is supporting the Sudan Armed Force, the General Al-Buhran, and Wagner is also participating on the side of the Rapid Special Force. If you reflect on these issues. Thank you so much. Please.
Certainly. When I was dealing with the African affairs as the special representative of the President of Russia, in 2011, in close cooperation with a friend of mine, Melis Zenawi, we organized the first Russian-African Business Forum in Addis Ababa. It was a unique event because in 2011, not many Russian companies were seriously thinking of investing in Africa or doing business in Africa, whatever. But the main conclusion which I made listening to the discussions at that forum was very simple. All the armed conflicts in Africa are internationalized, not regarding the other parts of the world, but also regarding Africa itself. You say soldiers from Central Africa are seen in Sudan, soldiers from other countries are seen, soldiers from Algeria are seen in Mali, soldiers from Mali are seen in Algeria, the Tuaregs, what is happening in Niger, other parts of Sahel zone. All these conflicts are internationalized. But the solution, the strategic solution, can be to internationalize Pan-African infrastructure economic projects, like building pipelines, building railroads, creating new air transportation network. Only if African nations are involved in Pan-African infrastructure projects, which to my mind support all types of businesses and support appeasement of all warriors, that can be a strategic solution. And the Russian interest, to my mind, is crystal clear. We are ready to cooperate with all African nations. We do not have a bad colonial history in Africa. We never had colonies in Africa. Even our most famous poet is from Ethiopia, Alexander Pushkin. This is my understanding. This is my understanding as a scholar, as a professor. I'm not in politics. I'm just looking at what is happening from outside. But my understanding is that, if I may quote President Reagan, it's economy stupid. Only big infrastructural projects can bring peace to Africa. Only working together on ambitious projects can become a driver for political solution
Actually, Senator Margelov probably jokes that he may be too naive. He is very pragmatic person, and also, in addition to those many titles and positions I listed, he has had experience in leading major Russian corporations, being vice president to a company of Sistema here, among others, or to Transneft. So that's already this two list that it's economy stupid and the role of business is not completely something which he examined from the books.
No, I'm serious saying that the role of joint economic projects should not be underestimated. It should not be underestimated. Look at the European experience. The détente started not with counting warheads. The détente started with gas pipelines.
Thank you.
That's my answer.
Bumba, please.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Womba from Zambia. If I heard you correctly, during your presentation, you talked about...
I love Victoria Falls. I've been there several times.
Oh, lovely. You should visit it again. So if I heard you correctly, you mentioned, you talked about Russia's readiness, willingness to undertake military peacekeeping missions in Africa upon invitation. My question is, I would like to find out what form of peacekeeping missions are these? Is there any cost attached to it? And does it mean Russia will come with its own military equipment, or will the host country provide those machinery? Thank you.
Well, my personal experience in dealing with Russian troops in Africa as part of the UN peacekeeping forces is limited to our helicopter groups in Chad, South Sudan, and to our military observers in Western Sahara. As I see today, Russia is ready to be more and more involved in different security issues in Africa militarily, with its forces, with its equipment, sending the troops of the Russian Africa Corps to several countries of Africa. So for me, it's a sign that Russia is ready to be a responsible player in peacekeeping in Africa, not only voting in the UN Security Council, but also sending its soldiers to defend Africans in Africa.
Thank you. Please, there was a question there, then a lady next. Yes, please. Please, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My name is Abubakar Abdi. I would like to ask you two questions here. I'm glad that you talked about your role you played during the time Sudan and South Sudan separated in 2011. By that time, I remember that night I listened the whole story from the TV, and I remember that it was a bit quite interesting that people in South Sudan that day, Juba, there was a military parade held in Juba, and the other side in Khartoum, I remember I watched that same night from Al Jazeera, people slaughtering camels, celebrating for the separation of this. The question is, later, after 1 year, there was a crisis erupted in a place called the Hijli crisis between the border of Sudan and South Sudan, which was in line with the demarcation of the border between the two countries, area which is rich in oil. So I may like to give me a brief understanding from that. The second thing is to the Sudan, a country that I was involved a lot about the analysis of Sudan crisis. And when you read the history of Sudan from 1954, the time of Aboud, up to Burhan of today, there were military coups all over until recently. So my question is, until the later country blocked entire to civil war, is the diplomacy that you were part of it during the time of separation still today be used to solve the same crisis in Sudan? That's my second question. The last is about... My last question is about, in Africa, after independence, most of countries around in 1961, there were in Arusha, African countries came together and they discussed about African borders should be remained exactly the way colonies have been demarcated. The separation of Sudan and South Sudan brought a whole history in the continent. For instance, I come from Somalia. After the separation of Sudan, we have recently seen the rise of regions trying to break away from countries. So the second question is, was it a mistake, the separation of Sudan, since it brought a rise of more regions willing to break away, since the agreement in Arusha was being violated? Thank you so much.
Let me start with the third question, the borders. Before the separation of South Sudan in 2011, we saw the separation of Eritrea from Ethiopia in 1993. So your point is incorrect. The trigger was pushed not in 2011, it was pushed long before. The question of post-colonial borders is an issue not only for Africa, but also for Greater Middle East. The redrawing of post-colonial borders is a difficult issue. Look at the relations between Syria and Lebanon, Iraq and Kuwait, even between Syria and Turkey, when the segment called Liwa Iskandar or Iskandarun was granted to Turkey from the French Syria. The Sudanese president Jafar al-Nimeiri has said once, في العالم العربي كل شيء ممكن. In the Arabic world, anything is possible. Not only in the Arabic world. في العالم العربي كل شيء ممكن. هذا كان يعني السطر الأول في الميثاق الوطني السوداني. It was the first sentence in the Sudanese national charter when Jafar al-Nimeiri became the president. In some cases, the redrawing of borders can be more or less peaceful. In some cases, not. What is happening between Morocco, Algeria, and Western Sahara is also an issue. It's also an African issue. So I can oppose your statement that the separation of the succession of South Sudan became a trigger to or had a domino effect for African stability. My answer is no. As for other issues, can you remind me the second question?
The second question was the diplomacy is still...
The diplomacy, I truly believe, I've never worked for the Russian Foreign Ministry, I'm not a ranking diplomat, but I truly believe in diplomacy because I saw examples of how it worked, Don't forget that in 2008, the Russian-American relations were in a rather bad shape and they needed reset. Obama and Medvedev agreed about the reset. But may I remind you what has become the first project of Russian-American reset? The peaceful succession of South Sudan. General Scott Gration from American side and Mikhail Margelov from the Russian side became two unofficial diplomats, not having ranks of plenipotentiary ambassadors, who started working together on peaceful succession of South Sudan. It did good job even for bilateral Russian-American relations. So diplomacy works not only in one direction, it can work in different directions. That's why I'm an optimist. Shukran, ya akhway. Well, the crisis of Abyei, you mean? Yeah, the crisis of Abyei. Well, again, in 2011, at the point of succession of South Sudan, the issue of Abyei was left aside. It was left aside for further negotiations. These negotiations did not start. The conflict started. So, and I think that both sides are to blame.
Thank you. Habiba?
Thank you so much. My name is Habiba. I'm from Ethiopia. Thank you so much for your nice presentation. Like as you said, rather than the conflict that we face, security for Africa is about safety from threat of disease, hunger, unemployment, social conflict, and ethnic conflict, even the political repression. So most of the time, the Western style of peacekeeping and peacemaking missions are, we can say, failed, and because there is a greater interest of international actors on that related to the peacekeeping and peacemaking missions, but it intensifies and heightens the complexity of the African continent, the political, the economic, and the security environment as well. So do you think that the involvement of the solution that you recommend, the involvement of those countries or the international actors for those peacekeeping and peacemaking mission is sustainable and effective? Because we have seen that they're aggravating the situation in the countries, and the countries are just becoming more and more the conflict and the terrorism areas most of the time, the Libya situation, even the recent situation in Sudan. It becomes very intensified. So those the conflict, it becomes very hard for the society because it have a crisis related to the social, the economic, and every crisis happened. So do you think that the international actors' involvement in the countries for peacekeeping mission is sustainable and effective?
Well, from my experience, what I saw on the ground, so to speak, in different African countries, I can mention and I can praise the unique role of Ethiopia in peacekeeping missions. For example, I saw Ethiopian soldiers on the ground in many countries, and I should say that they are very efficient and very professional. There is peacekeeping and peacekeeping. For some countries, peacekeeping is a good business, like Bangladesh, for example. You see it in Africa. Fiji, where's Fiji? But Fiji is in every peacekeeping contingent. And I can continue that list. If you treat peacekeeping as a serious political issue, it's one point. If you look at peacekeeping operations as a business for your poor people, it's another point. So to my mind, the answer for your question is not here in this auditorium. It's both on the East River in New York and in Addis Ababa in African Union headquarters.
Thank you. We have time for approximately 2 questions, I guess, or just to make sure that our Russian participants also have the floor. Please go ahead.
My name is Alexei, and I have a question that previous speakers said a lot about China's involvement in some big projects in Africa. They involved in the whole Africa, so they're working with it. And my question is, maybe if China is interested in solving these conflicts, like they maybe they can solve them like with Russia, like we did in 2011 with America. So, and again, if China is investing so much, he must be interested in peace in this continent. Thank you.
Just one moment. China has big economic interests in different parts of Africa. China is hunting for the resources. It needs everything, and it's everywhere. In some places, it builds new skyscrapers, hotels, airports, like in Addis Ababa, for example. The African Union headquarters are built by the Chinese friends. In some places, highways, airports, like in Angola. In some places, when it sees competition, it kills the competitors. The light industry in South Africa was highly developed. The South Africa as a state was highly developed, and the production of South African light industry companies, shirts, blue jeans, jackets, were on all the Western markets after 1989, after the end of the policy of what was the name of it? Apartheid. Yes, after the end of the policy of apartheid. The products of South African light industry were everywhere. I will never forget, in 1991 in New York, I was buying Calvin Klein shirts made in South Africa. The Chinese came, they bought all the factories, they took all the looms, the sewing machines and all that stuff, and take them to China. Now, in Cape Town, if you go to my favorite store, Old Hockey, to buy a shirt, it's made in China, it's not made in South Africa anymore. Did I answer your question? You have to play chess with them.
Maybe Chinese students who are here in this room.
That's the only solution.
And have their prospects here. Okay. In any case, no, I'm okay. Any other questions or reactions? Right here. Yes. Please.
Good evening. My name is Nachi. I'm from Zambia. I have been following this issue for quite some time now. If I'm not
with the mic a little bit.
Okay. Can you get me now? Hello. Okay. I have been following this.
I do, but there are some people.
Hello. Is everybody able to get me now?
Oh, good.
Okay. I have been following this issue for some time now. If I don't know if I'm correct, but I believe that the war in Sudan started last year in April 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Till date, I believe it's war, so we don't expect any good things from it. The fact that a few weeks ago the maternity hospital was bombed, I'm sure you're aware of that. It's not really a question. I would just like to find out, what is your opinion on what do you think Russia has in relation to what's going on? Sorry. I would like to hear your opinion on what you think should be done for the both sides to actually reach a mutual understanding in the negotiation process.
As I know, Russia is working hard on trying to build bridges between two parts in the conflict of Sudan. Russian diplomats, Russian embassy was kicked out of Khartoum to the port Sudan. Russian diplomats are there now with the legitimate government. At the same time, Russia, non-officially, of course, has contacts with the other side of the conflict. And the only thing I know in details is that Russian diplomats are working hard today, trying to create more and more docking mechanisms between the two parts.
With that, our Q&A session is over. We went through Sudan, South Sudan story, and we went beyond that much more. And of course, I'm sure there are questions as long as we do not have any recipe, one single recipe for all the conflicts,
we don't.
neither in Africa nor elsewhere. As realists, not as naive people, we have to realize that we will be facing more conflict both in Africa and elsewhere, not because we want to, but because unfortunately the borders by the colonialists were dividing nations and tribes, and for economic reasons, for quite a number of reasons. Our mission is at least to know how to try to reduce the consequences of the conflict and slowly but surely find peaceful ways. If we have the magic to prevent all the conflicts elsewhere, neither witch doctors nor others would give you such a magic potion, I'm afraid, nor our speaker today. But unlike many witch doctors or those who pretended they have some secret potion, he does not, but at the same time he was brave enough to jump in and participated in one specific conflict.
And I truly believe
case.
that we shall overcome.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
And you have already a number of our publications, been member of editorial board
Thank you.
of this yearbook. Unless you want another copy, I will keep it to the participants. But this is something new. This is, you're one of the first persons to get it. It's anthology
Thank
of
you very
PIR
much.
Center works for the last
Thank you so
30
much
years.
indeed. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you for having me here. I'm flying to Addis Ababa on the 19th of October, by the way. Just in case.
Yeah.
Thank you.